So I just came to the realization recently that the original John Wick film is now 10 years old. How has it been that long already? I was a huge fan of this film when it first came out. I remember way back when I first saw the trailer for this film, and compared to most people at the time who thought it was going to be mid, my reaction was, you know what, I bet this film could be pretty fun. I ended up forgetting all about that trailer as time went on, forgetting all about the movie. That was until shortly before the film released in cinemas. You see, at the time, I was heavily invested in a video game called Payday 2. I absolutely loved this game, and I have many fond memories of playing the game every single day with my friends. John Wick was released as a playable character in Payday 2 shortly before the film came out, and with that came another trailer. This time from the Payday YouTube channel, and it was titled Introducing John Wick. This trailer showcased the very first fight scene from the movie, where John is fighting off assassins raiding his house. Upon seeing this trailer, I was immediately hooked, thinking to myself, holy shit, this movie looks so goddamn cool, I have to go watch this. So watch it I did, and I absolutely loved this movie. John Wick was such a refreshing movie at the time of its release. During the past few years prior, a lot of Western action films relied heavily on shaky cam and quick cuts. I absolutely hated it. Action films around that time were atrocious. It's a huge part of the reason why I ended up developing an interest in a lot of foreign action films, because in my mind they did action so much better than Hollywood. John Wick was such a breath of fresh air for me, and I hoped that moving forward, future directors would take inspiration, which thankfully they did. John Wick was a trendsetter, changing the trajectory of action films moving forward for the better. However, as much as I loved the original movie, I never expected it to become as huge of a franchise as it is now. John Wick has come so far these past 10 years, and thus I wanted to make a video discussing my thoughts on this movie a decade later. Do I still like it as much as I did back then? Does it still hold up? Has it aged well? Let's dive into it. Before we continue with the video, I'd just like to say that my debut science fiction novel is out now, link in the description below. Now, on with the rest of the video. Released October 30th, 2014, John Wick was written by Derek Kolstad and marked the directorial debut of both Chad Stahelski and David Leitch. The latter would go on to direct Atomic Blonde and Bullet Train, while Chad Stahelski helmed all of the John Wick sequels. The film centers around retired hitman John Wick, who finds himself thrust back into the criminal underworld he left behind after the son of a Russian crime lord steals his car and kills his beloved dog. The dog was a final gift from his wife, who died days earlier, therefore bringing even more loss into his life when he's already in a very grief-stricken place. He embarks on a bloody, violent quest to kill those responsible, unleashing his skills as a former assassin while navigating the secret underworld of contract killers governed by strict codes of honor. That's basically the premise of the story. I remember when I first heard that premise, I thought it was a little bit amusing that this film is quite literally a story about a hitman avenging the death of his puppy dog. But when you consider the broader context of the dog's death, it's actually kind of emotional and touching. John's wife was his entire world, and before she dies, she leaves him a dog so that he can have someone else to love in her place. That dog is the only reminder he has of his late wife. That dog is the only source of love he has in his life. And when that dog is unfairly killed, John understandably spirals. It's a plot element that's not only very sympathetic, but it endears you to the character of John and makes you really, really want to see him get justice at all costs. Prior to this film, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch had long careers as stunt coordinators, which worked to their advantage when creating this movie, as they had the expertise required in order to understand how best to frame and choreograph action scenes. This film also marked the resurgence of Keanu Reeves' acting career. Keanu Reeves was very much involved in the development in this film. In fact, he was the one who brought David Leitch and Chad Stahelski on board as directors. He also worked closely with Derek Kolstad in order to rewrite the script multiple times in order to better fit him, as the character of John Wick was originally envisioned as a man in his mid-60s or 70s, but when Keanu Reeves became involved, the character was reworked to fit his age and persona. Upon release, the film became a surprise hit. Despite being somewhat of a lower budget film with a simple premise, it received critical acclaim for its direction, action, and world building. It was praised for rejuvenating the action genre through its fresh take on choreography. It quickly developed a cult following for itself before the franchise eventually became more mainstream as the sequels went on. Like I said earlier, this film was a breath of fresh air. It set a new standard for action films, and throughout the past decade, we've seen so many films take inspiration from it. John Wick truly changed action films for the better, and even though I'm not as invested in the franchise as I used to be, I still have a lot of gratitude for what this film accomplished. But we'll dive deeper into this film's legacy and the impact that it made later. For now, it's time to discuss my personal thoughts on this movie and what I think of it all these years later. For starters, I think my favorite aspect about this film and the entire John Wick franchise as a whole is the world building, lore, and mythology surrounding the criminal underworld that John inhabits. It feels familiar, grounded, yet also otherworldly, for lack of a better term, an entire secret society that lives underneath the surface of our own. While many films since have replicated the action choreography of John Wick, I feel like very little have drawn inspiration from this film's world building, and that's a shame, because this franchise's world building is actually really, really cool, and I love how this criminal underworld feels mysterious and mystical, but at the same time grounded in reality. As the John Wick sequels went on, I became less and less interested in watching them for the action, more interested in watching them just to learn more about this cryptic underbelly that John belongs to. I also love how this movie feels like a video game or a comic book brought to life. I remember watching this film for the first time and thinking to myself how much it reminded me of some of the video games I enjoy playing, while also feeling like the cinematography and visuals would lend themselves extremely well to a comic book, especially with how the subtitles are sometimes styled whenever somebody speaks in another language. We've gotten some comic book adaptations of the John Wick films, but it's an absolute crime that throughout the past 10 years we haven't gotten a truly great John Wick video game. There's been a lot of video games that have taken inspiration from John Wick, sure, but it would be nice to someday get a truly awesome game that's actually set in the world of John Wick. Hopefully we get a game like that in the future. In the meantime, on the off chance you're interested in playing any video games that make you feel kinda like John Wick, some personal recommendations I have for you are Splinter Cell Blacklist, the original Watch Dogs game, and maybe Watch Dogs Legion as well, the Max Payne trilogy, Midnight Fight Express, Superhot, and Severed Steel. There's also an upcoming game called Spine, which as of the making of this video, isn't out yet, but judging from what I've seen of the game so far, it feels like a cross between John Wick and Spider-Man. I'm absolutely keen on checking it out someday. Anyway, moving on with the rest of my thoughts on this film, the next thing I want to discuss is the action. The action in John Wick is, of course, the film's standout aspect. It's visceral, raw, intense, and engaging. It's also very stylized, yet tactical. The filmmakers were very thoughtful when it came to this film's action. The camera work and choreography pulls you into the action and truly makes you feel immersed in its kinetic brutality. I also like how this film, and its sequels for that matter, apparently make use of real-life combat techniques and strategic moves as it gives the action a sense of authenticity. The action still feels stylized, of course, but the realistic combat techniques help make the stylized action feel grounded and not too unrealistic. The most popular and arguably best fight scene from the first movie is probably the nightclub. I love the way that this scene starts with John stealthily assassinating guards while the song Think by MacLeod plays in the background, before the action slowly yet gradually ramps up as soon as he finds Yosef Tarasov and he begins to hunt him down. And as it ramps up, we go from the mellow, meditative music by MacLeod to electronica that is a lot more kinetic and energetic. The way that the fight scene is choreographed in sync with the music is so cool. Even the gunshots are in sync with the beat of the song. The club fight scene is not only enhanced by its use of music, but also in its visual presentation, having a really great neon noir aesthetic, lots of blues and purples, low light, and a stylish atmosphere. It's overall such a great fight scene where everything is on point. The choreography, the cinematography, visuals, lighting, soundtrack, everything is stellar. Another fight scene I really like is the very first one. Like I said before, they showed that scene off in a Payday 2 trailer, and that fight scene was what made me think, holy shit, I absolutely need to see this movie. So I have a lot of fondness for that fight scene in particular, because it's the fight that sold me on the entire movie. Another scene I like is the final fight scene in the movie, which I enjoy mainly because it has an emphasis on John using his car as a weapon, which is not only cool and inventive, but also slightly amusing. Like in this scene, John kills a guy by running him over with his car, and as his body is rolling up and over the roof, John shoots the guy through the roof repeatedly. It's ridiculous, but also kinda cool. Overall, the action in this movie was really damn good for its time. Although I feel like the fight scenes in the sequels are significantly better. It feels like a lot of the action set pieces in this movie helped set the foundations and groundwork for even more advanced, elaborate, and crazier fight scenes in the sequels. Like I said earlier in this video, the fight choreography for John Wick was a trend setter. Nobody in Hollywood was really making fight scenes like this. Sure, some foreign action films were doing similar things, but to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, this was the first American action film to be doing stuff like this. So for Western audiences, the action in John Wick felt very fresh, very original, and it truly evolved the action film genre for the better. I feel like what was done in this film was done better in the sequels, at least in regards to the fight choreography and the world building, but despite that, the fight scenes in this film still hold up extremely well in comparison to a lot of action films around the same time, which I feel didn't age nearly as gracefully. Like, seriously, Taken 3 came out in the same year as John Wick, and the only thing I remember about that movie was how over the top the shaky cam, the quick cuts were. Hell, that scene where Liam Neeson climbs a fence and they cut between like 14 different shots in under 6 seconds is absolutely infamous at this point. Anyway, looking back on the first John Wick movie, I don't really have too many criticisms. I guess if I really had to nitpick, I'd say that the story of this film was very simplistic. It's a very conventional revenge thriller. Besides the outstanding fight choreography and overall filmmaking, it's nothing you haven't already seen before. However, I feel like the creative team behind this franchise more than made up for that critique through the sequels by putting a lot more thought into the storyline for those films, expanding upon the world of the original movie and exploring not just the character of John, but also the world he inhabits a lot more in depth. Plus, regardless of the film's rather generic storyline, that doesn't change the fact that John Wick was a truly innovative film, and it was 100% what the action genre so desperately needed at the time of its release. How many times have I said breath of fresh air so far in this retrospective? I cannot understate just how much we really needed a film like John Wick in the industry in order to kill the trend of subpar action films for good. This leads me to discussing the legacy that this film left. The legacy of John Wick is so incredibly important. John Wick had a significant influence on action films that were released following its debut, emphasizing clear, wide-shot action cinematography as the new standard for action filmmaking. Shaky cam or quick cuts can be okay when done right, I suppose. Hell, I just finished rewatching the Bourne trilogy recently, and all these years later, I still personally find those films to be very fun and entertaining. But the problem was that Hollywood developed an over-reliance on shaky cam and quick cuts to the point where a lot of action films following the Bourne trilogy were very difficult to sit through. Besides the fact that John Wick helped steer other action films in the right direction, it also left behind a much broader legacy too. For example, the character of John Wick himself, who went on to become super iconic and well known. I don't think John would have been as iconic as he is now without Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is very charismatic in the role of John, portraying him with this stoic demeanor with an air of mystery and intrigue surrounding him. Plus, he's just got this super cool yet elegant aura and a vibe surrounding him where you can't help but look at the guy and think to yourself, damn, this guy is so cool. John also became a very memeable character too, which, if you ask me, is also another sign of the character's enduring legacy in pop culture, with a lot of memes surrounding John focusing on just how much of a badass, unstoppable force of nature he truly is. And finally, another sign of the movie's enduring legacy is just how massive the franchise became over the years. Not only do we have 4 John Wick films now, but we also have multiple spin-offs in the works too, most notably the Continental show that's currently on Amazon Prime, as well as the upcoming Ballerina movie starring Ana de Armas. I don't think anybody ever expected the John Wick franchise to become as massive as it is now, and it's really crazy to see just how far this franchise has come since its inception. It's going to be really interesting to see where the franchise goes from here. I hope that we continue to get some pretty cool stuff out of this franchise in the near future. Anyway, that's about it. Those are my thoughts on the original John Wick movie 10 years later and the enduring legacy it left behind. The original John Wick movie is one that I will always have a soft spot for, and of course, a lot of nostalgia. In some of my other videos, I've mentioned this movie a lot in passing, so it's great to finally have the opportunity to discuss John Wick on my channel. But what are your thoughts on John Wick 10 years later? Did you see the movie back then? Have your thoughts and opinions on it changed since? Whatever you think, feel free to let me know in the comments below and like the video. If you're interested in seeing more from me, I cover a lot of movies, shows, video games, and other pop culture that I enjoy on this channel. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, then feel free to subscribe. I'm also an author, so if you're interested in reading something new, whether that may be sci-fi, fantasy, etc., then feel free to check out my work. Links in the description below. But with all that being said, thank you so much for checking out my video, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.